All right. Well, we'll introduce you here and then we'll kind of get started and they can pile in as they come. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our morning lunch and learn. This morning, we have North Dakota native Dr. Paul Stremick with us. Dr. Paul Stremick retired in 2019 after 31 years in education. He served as superintendent in 5 districts in 3 different states. The districts in North Dakota included Grafton, Dickinson, and North Border. And in 2018, Dr. Stremick was named North Dakota Superintendent of the Year. He took a leading role in a lawsuit against the state of North Dakota to create an equitable and adequate funding for all school districts. Since that time, he has been involved in the rewrites of the school foundation formula in North Dakota. Dr. Stremick also teaches classes and offers seminars to NDSBA, which is why many of you may be familiar with him, as well as he has taught at the University of North Dakota in the areas of school finance for master's and doctoral level students. He currently does consult work for school districts throughout the state and resides in Walhalla. Today, Dr. Stremick will be covering school finance and school finance strategies that are pertinent to a school board's successful annual budget, which many of you will be configuring as this July kind of month comes up here. So during the presentation, you may pose any questions you have in the Q&A feature, which is the best option for me to get them to Dr. Stremick during this time. And I will kind of do my best to moderate them in, as I told you, Paul. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Stremick.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. As Taylor said, we're going to go over the school finance, and really what we're going to look at is the budget worksheet, and we're going to look at it from last year's perspective going into next year's perspective, and next year being the 22-23 school year. So let's get started. Oh, going too fast here. Okay, state aid. State aid's determined on a number of calculations. The biggest impact is student membership. It's a student-based formula. The more students you have, the more money you get. It's just that simple. If you lose students, you typically lose money. And so when everything revolves around the students, again, student membership. Then there's other program membership. We get add-ons is what I like to call them. You get additional money for certain groups of students. Special education, again, that's in North Dakota, that's based on all students. There's other things such as summer school, at risk, ELL or LEP, things of that nature. So you do get more money based on those programs. Now, remember, this is a fully integrated formula. So it calculates what you should get, and then it looks at what you get locally and subtracts that. And those formula adjustments are from other local revenue. And the biggest thing there is that doesn't include coal and oil revenue there. So that is subtracted because that's a source of revenue. Property tax is subtracted. And then some baseline funding is either added or subtracted. And the baseline funding is something we want to talk about because that is disappearing. It started this year and it's going to continue to go away. So those of you who are on what we call a hold harmless or a transition minimum or maximum, those amounts are going to disappear. And like I said, we will talk about that. Okay, let's get right into the formula. Right here, it all starts with student membership. And I want to say this is Jamestown's budget worksheet. So I'd like to thank Dr. Rob Leck for sharing that with me. I like Jamestown because it covers a lot of areas. You start off with your ADM. And I would say right now, everybody should have their ADM available. That's either calculated by the school secretary, the business manager, or the superintendent. You can print it out of STARS or Power School, but it should be available to everyone. So you should be able to put in your new numbers right now. Keep in mind that if you don't run your pre-K special education, you may have to get those numbers from your special education unit. So some of the smaller districts, you may not house your pre-K special ed, but you do have it, so you should have a number, and you'd have to call your special ed unit, then input that number into stars, and into Power School. But it should generate. So you can see here, Jamestown has just under 2,200 ADM when everything's added together.
Hey, Paul.
Yep.
ADM's numbers should be actual figures from this last school year, correct?
Right. And that's why I say they should be available. The school year, let's just say, ended at the end of May. So you should be able to print them out now. And they should be very close to what they're actually going to be. You should print them out. We're going to base everything on last year's numbers. That is correct. But last year for this formula would be this current school year, because we're talking about the 21-22, and then we're going to go into the 22-23. So yes, good question. Okay, let's go here. The next part is other program memberships. You can see you get additional funds for some of these things. The first one on line 8 is an alternative high school. If you run an alternative high school, those students in that program get an extra 0.25. And really what that means is they get 25% more funding, because they're counted as a 1.0 on the first page and an extra 0.25 here. Special education, as I mentioned, that's based on all of our students in North Dakota. So you get an extra 0.082 or 8.2% more funding for all of your ADM. Pre-K special ed, again, that's a high cost program, usually a low number of students with some special needs. So you get extra money, 0.17 for those students. And then the REA, that money is generated and it's a 0.2%. So it's not a whole lot of money, but you can see what happens here. Now, keep in mind as you do your budget that line 11, you technically don't get. You get it and then you pay it out to the REA. So it's kind of in and out money. And I believe now Adam wants you to count it as revenue and count it as an expenditure. So business managers should be aware of that. But that's in and out money. And same thing I should mention with this special ed line 9, the money that's generated there, depending on your school district, some of that is sent directly to your special ed unit. And if that is the case, don't count it as revenue. You have to take that off. That's one mistake that I see happen quite a bit. People count it as revenue, then they're always overestimating their revenue, because in a lot of places that is sent directly to the special ed unit. If you want to count it as revenue, then you got to count it as expenditure to offset it, or you just don't count it as revenue. I have an arrow here. That is the 2022 fall enrollment. And again, remember I said we're using last year's budget worksheet here. It'll be 23 next year, but that 0.6 is going to change to a 0.7. And so really what that means, if you grow, you're going to get 0.7, 70% of the foundation aid payment next year. It's increasing from 0.6 to 0.7. The following year, it'll be 0.7 to 0.8, then 0.9, then to 1.0. And then at that time, we'll truly have on-time funding. So if you do grow, you're going to get some additional money. It's not going to be the full payment, but it's going to be based on that 0.7 next year. Down below, the spring adjustment, at the end, they want to just make sure you have those students throughout the whole year. So you might have a plus or a minus there if you have any new students. As I mentioned, ELL, if you have any of those students, you get paid extra. You can see the high needs kids of the level 1 is extra 40% in funding. Then level 2 is 28%. Then level 3 is a 0.07, which is 7% more. Now, if you don't have some of these numbers available for the ELL and some of these other numbers available right away when you're doing your budget worksheet, I always tell school districts, just use the numbers you had last year from the sheet that's provided by the state through Adam Tesher. So you should just use them. Typically, they don't change a whole lot. If you know something is drastically changed, then go ahead and make those changes. But again, I think for starters, you can start off with these same numbers. As we go through this, if you have an alternative middle school, you can see what you have there. Home education, if you have any students. And again, that's not just one student if you had it, it's the hours that you provided something. So you could have 10 students and still not add up to one ADM because it's the hours you provide services. So just keep that in mind.
And Paul, what date in the fall is used to determine is used in determining if the ADM is greater than the previous year's ADM for line 12?
Typically, I like to say September 15th, but it varies. I believe they use like the third Monday or something like that. It's right in the middle of September. And I believe it's always on a Monday that they use it, fall enrollment. And for those who have access to STARS, when your fall enrollment is due, you'll be able to see that due date, and that's the number that they use.
Okay,
And so
thank you.
those corrections can be made then. But some of you know already, if you're getting new students enrolling, then you might know that, okay, last year I had 200 students in the district and I already have a bunch of kids who are either open enrolling or new families moving in. And I know I'm going to have 5 or 6 kids more than I had last year. You can go ahead and put that in there when you make your budget estimate. A little bit easier in smaller schools. Larger schools, I would say if you're typically growing, put that in there. What are some districts that are growing? West Fargo grows every year, so they should put a number in, and again, use an estimate of what's happened in the other years. Mackenzie County, Watford City, they've been growing, put a number in so that your budget is relatively close. And again, you can look back to the last 3 to 5 years and come up with that number. Summer school, that's the number of hours that you provide services. Again, Jamestown here probably provided services to a couple hundred kids, but it came out to be 63.51 ADM because they don't go full time in the summer. And so that's how that's calculated. But again, that should be on your STARS. Now keep in mind, summer school is actually last summer. So when you're doing next year's budget, it's not this summer for the summer school enrollments, it's last summer's enrollment. So you should already have that. It's a year behind. Because technically this summer will be counted in the 22-23 school year, not the 21-22, and we're using last year's numbers. Special ed ESY, same thing. Special ed unit provides those services. That's extended school year. Usually they set it up. Even if it is held in your building, you need to get those students and the hours that our services are provided, and you should have a number there. Most districts do have that extended school year. And then just a couple other ones for real small schools, small but isolated schools there. But all that gets calculated. And the biggest change here will be this on-time funding. That's going up from 0.6 to 0.7. And again, keep in mind, it's 0.8 the following year, 0.9, then finally 1.0. That's what's in the current law. So these are all the add-ons that you get. Again, for those of you wanting to do your budget, you should have your ADM. Use your numbers from last year in this area if you're unsure. And that should give you the next number. Let's see. Which is the total weighted ADM. So again, if you remember, Jamestown started off with, we said, just under 2,200 students, 2,200 ADM. It was 21 something. And now they're up to 2,450, 2,446. And then we're going to take the school size weighting factor. And Jamestown's a large school district, so their weighting factor is a 1.0. Now, for those of you taking notes, the arrow means that is changing. So every time you see an arrow on my slides, that means that's changing. And that is changing for schools below 250 students and below. There's a 7-year transition. They're increasing it. If you're the smallest school district of 110 students or less, couple of years ago, the weighting factor was 1.36, and in 7 years, it's going to be a 1.72. So it's going to double. And so that is going up. So if you're anywhere between 240 or 250 and 110, that's going to change and go up. And that's why that arrow's there. So you should generate more money because you'll have a larger school district size weighting factor. Let's see. Go through this, the per student rate. This current year that we're just ending was 10,136. Next year it will be, I have it in the notes down here, 10,237. So it's going up 1%, is just over $100, $101. And that's in century code. And we don't know what it's going to be the next year because that'll be determined by the legislature. I would hope it would go up significantly, especially with inflation and everything else, the cost for everybody to maintain their education with heating, salaries, things of that nature. That's where you'll generate your money with a higher per student rate. We call that the foundation aid rate. Let's see. So as we do that, the total formula payment for Jamestown is $24,700 or $24,796,000. And remember, it's a fully integrated formula, so that includes everything that they get. Now, if you remember from the first page, we said you get a payment and then we have some adjustments. So we'll move forward. Adjustments. We'll start off with the baseline funding. Transition minimum and transition maximum are on lines 29 and 30. And again, there's arrows here. These are disappearing. So what I would say is if you have your budget worksheet available or in front of you, look and see if you have a number in those columns. Typically, the districts that would have a number in the line 29, the transition maximum, would be low property value districts. And for the most part, it's reservation districts because there is no property value as far as taxable valuation is concerned. So that's who would be on line 29. Line 30 are property rich school districts. And that would be some small school districts. And I think I have on the next slide the number of school districts, but there's, I think, around 90 school districts that have numbers in these two. And there's only 175 school districts. So odds are if you're smaller, you have a number here. And that is going to disappear. If you have a number in these two lines right here over on the right. And what they're doing is you used to get 100% of that money. This year, you got 85%. This is my third arrow. It's changing. It's going down by 15% every year. So you're losing 15% of that transition money, the hold harmless money. We're at 85% this year. If it goes down 15%, that means next year, you're only going to get 70% of that money. The following year, 55%. The year after that, 40%. It keeps going down 15% a year. I know some districts who have a couple $1 million in this line on line 30. They are going to lose that. So you need to plan for that. That's really a big issue. You know it's coming. They gave you 2 years to plan for it before it went into effect. And now it's happening and it's a 7-year process. So you really can't say you didn't know it was coming. On the other hand, if you're a transition maximum district, they're going to pay you more money. And so that's good. They're going to pay you more money. That's what transition maximum means. But again, for those small districts, and I'm going to say it's about half the districts in the state, you're going to be losing money right there. Now, again, the plan from the legislature, and it doesn't work out with all the districts, But if we go back up a slide, this weighting factor, that's going to increase for small schools and give you more money. Back here, you're going to lose money here. The concept was hopefully between the two, you'll break even. Now, I can tell you that a school district that I'm very familiar with cannot make up that $2.5 million. It's impossible. They just can't make it up with a higher weighting factor. Now, I was working with another small school. They're actually going to make a little bit. They're just losing a little bit here, $100,000. And over the course of 7 years, they'll make up more money when this weighting factor goes up. And again, part of that's based on their school size and how much money they get from the increased weighting factor. So again, it's going to have a different impact on everybody, but there's several school districts who are going to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, even a couple $1 million right there. And again, the arrows mean things are changing. So again, here for Jamestown, they're on the formula, so they have nothing in those two lines. So their number stays the same. And let's just skip ahead to the property tax. I think it's on the next slide when we do it. Property tax. Let's skip down to section C here. Their taxable valuation the year before was just about $76 million. Times 60 mils, that means they're going to generate $4.559 million of 60 mils. Right there. That is going to disappear, or that's going to be subtracted, I should say. If we go back to here, there's the 4.559 million. That's subtracted off the top because the formula is fully integrated. You should end up with that 24.8 million. If you get 4.5 million from property tax, they're going to subtract that. And then they're going to subtract a couple other things. Section B here. They are going to subtract contribution from other local revenue. You can see here, it's tuition, county, and county is where your oil, coal, and gas money shows up. A couple other things, electricity, mobile home in lieu of tax, telecommunications, all that's calculated in here, and it comes up to $314,000. And so again, if we go up to here, I guess I don't have to scroll back. They started off at the 24.8, they lose 4.5, they lose the 314,000. So that means their state aid payment. So what they're going to get from the state is 19.9, so just under $20 million. So think about that. They're supposed to get 24.8. They get some of it from other places, so the state only makes up the difference, and they get just under $20 million. So that means that extra 4.8 or so is going to be made up from local sources, and it's right there, property tax and other local revenue. And
Paul,
those numbers are different for every school district. Yep.
And where do you get the numbers for line 38?
Line 38. The electric generation distribution.
Yep.
Line 38, those come from your county. And again, they do not change a whole lot. The county sends them to DPI. And I can tell you, a lot of districts I've worked with, like their electricity and telecommunication, it's the same every year. It changes very little. So again, if you don't have any numbers available, use what was in here last year. So go ahead and use what was in here last year. The only caveat I'll give you there is for the county. If you are in oil producing or coal producing and you know the price has gone up or the production has gone down or anything of that nature, you might want to make some adjustments, because some districts have $1 million in line 36. So you want to kind of see how the market goes and adjust it a little bit. But for the most part, for the other districts, you can use what was in here last year if you don't have any numbers. It's typically pretty similar.
Okay. And what about if a district was to get windmill money now? Do they report that somewhere, or does the county send that in somewhere?
The county sends it in. It's either going to be, and again, windmills are a little bit different because they're calculated under 2 or 3 different scenarios. Some of it would go under the electric generation here. And sometimes now they're considering it property and it's in the taxable valuation. So it's actually part of this 75.9. But either way, it would go there or there. And there's 2 scenarios. You'd have to check and see what scenario you're under. But again, if they're just starting to generate, it's going to use last year's numbers. So last year, there could have been 0 generation. Everything's a year behind. These numbers are actually last year's as well.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. I have a red arrow here under the percentage for the non-sinking in interest percentage. The arrow there means that there's a change, and actually the arrow this time means there is no change. So if you had a sinking in interest levy, or you passed a sinking in interest levy, this is not going to change. Whatever you had there last year stays. That's what they decided to do. And again, there's 2 calculations here. If this wasn't 100%, you'd get to subtract some of that money and keep it for these things, for this apportioned revenue. And then it's 75% of that number. So if this was 80% here, we take the 101,000 times 80%, come up with that number here, then that number is times 75%. This is a 2-year number. So working with the school district, I can tell you Mandan passed a bond issue. They're going to build a new high school. So they're going to levy more mills next year, and they're sinking in interest. And so they want to stick those numbers in here and get a lower percentage here to keep more money. That is not going to happen. It's a 2-year freeze. And then it's supposed to be recalculated at the end of the 2 years and set for 2 years again. Not sure I like that or agree with it. I think it was put in place so the state could budget for that. But again, for those districts that passed a bond issue this year, this is not going to change. And most people will think it is. When you do the budget worksheet, they'll think, oh, we passed a bond issue. We're levying 20 more mills there. So we can do that and deduct that and keep more money. It's not changing. So this red arrow means there is no change. That percentage is going to stay the same. You know, the one thing about school finance in North Dakota is it's actually pretty simple, but there's an exception to everything. There really is. There are rules. There's an exception to everything. The other thing I should mention that I don't have on the sheet, tuition is changing here. You're going to be able to keep more of that. I believe that 75% is going to change. And I can't remember if it starts next year or the following year, but it is changing. So you get to keep a little more of that, so that it's not subtracted off your formula. But that's a change that's happening in the future. And a lot of times when the legislature makes a change like that, they'll say, okay, we'll make the change, but it'll be 1 or 2 years down the road so that you can plan for it. And so they can budget for it. Not much different than this 85%. You know, that was a 2-year waiting period. Now it's 85, then it's going to be a 7-year transition period. This is going to be a transition period as well. So that's the formula. The biggest changes. I do want to talk about one down here that's highlighted. Not many school districts have this. This is if you're truly levying less than 60 mills in the general fund. There's only a handful of school districts. If your property value has gone up where you can't levy the 60 mills, that is accelerating, kind of like this 85%, that's going up, and they're making you levy more to get you on the formula. And again, I believe that's a 7-year process. I didn't highlight it because there's very few school districts that it affect. And sometimes, and mainly, most of them are in the oil patch. And when oil goes up or down, sometimes they can get on the formula faster or it takes longer. So that one kind of bounces around, but that is changing. So if you are a school district that levies less than 60 mils in the general fund because your valuation has gone up, they're going to force you to be at 60. And again, the concept is every K-12 school district in the state should levy 60 mils for K-12 education. And that's basically just an equity issue with the taxpayers, and everybody's contributing the same 60 mils for K-12 education. And if you want more above that, then it's up to the school board or the taxpayers. All right. We went through the tuition here. There's my line there. The tuition is changing, the 100%. That stays the same. See, it all gets subtracted. Here it is right here. 94 school districts were off the formula. And again, there's 175 or 176 school districts. So the majority of them are off the formula. So you are going to have numbers in a transition minimum or maximum line for half the school districts. Let's just take a look at Jamestown. State foundation aid, 10,136. And again, that's changing to 10,237. But that's everything included. On average, 60 mils, if you divide it by their weighted ADM or weighted student units, it's $1,864 per student. Contribution from other local revenue is $129 per student. So that means they're getting $8,143 in state aid per pupil. It all ends up for every school district at the 10,136. But again, based on your other local revenues, this changes. And that number is different for everybody. So if you're property rich, you're probably getting $5,000 to $6,000 per student in state aid. If you're property poor, you could be getting up to $9,000 or $9,500, maybe even $10,000 there. And again, that's the equity. So everybody ends up with the same amount of money. Bolded here, the actual state per pupil payment is different in every school district and will vary from year to year. Again, the concept is if two school districts had 500 students with all the same needs and everything, basically the formula, whether you're property rich or property poor, is going to say you should get the exact same amount of money. And that's what the formula is trying to do. Here it is here, 245 students or below, that's changing, and it's a 7-year process. The closer you are to 245, the less it changes. The closer you are to the 110, the more it changes every year. For those couple of school districts that are K6 or K8s, it tells you how to manipulate your ADM to get it on there. They used to have different weighting factors for K8s and K6, and they just made them all the same. They give you a calculation here to put your numbers in. There's the per pupil payment, transition maximum and minimum, 7 years, on-time funding, the 10%, and then adjustments to get all school districts on the 60 mils. So those are the big changes in the formula. That's where I have all the arrows. So that just recaps what's happening. Now to give you a little bit of an insight, just a quick review here. Every school district's supposed to levy the 60 mils. And again, there's an asterisk because again, there's an exception. If your valuation goes up too fast, you don't have to levy 60. And 60 to 70 is the maximum. 70 is the maximum. And again, there's an asterisk because if your valuation goes down, You could levy more than 70 mils, and that has happened. And those are all the exceptions. But 60 mils is basically mandated in the formula. The 60 to 70 is board action. And so what you'll see is the black funds that are underlined, that's all by board action. You can implement those. So you can go from 60 to 70 by board action. The only criteria is you can only increase 12% in dollars each year. So you can't, it would be very difficult to go from 60 to 70 in 1 year, but you could do it in 2 or 3 years. High school tuition levy, again, black and underlined, whatever you need for tuition. So if you have kids going out of district or the high cost students going somewhere for special education, some school districts use it for tuition for career and tech centers. You can levy whatever you need for tuition. Miscellaneous levy, boards can levy up to 12 mils by board action. And you can do all 12 in 1 year if you wanted to. It might make for an interesting budget hearing, but you can do that. Now let's just talk a little bit for those small districts that are losing their transition minimum, the hold harmless. If you're at 60 mils and at 0 mils in your miscellaneous, you have 10 mils there and 12 here to make that money up if you can't make it up through the waiting factor. So hopefully it will make it work. Again, 10 mils here and 12 here that you have board action to make that money up so you don't lose money. Might be more of a strain on your taxpayers, but there are options to recoup some of that. Let's just finish with the black and underlined ones because those are board action. Special reserve up to 3 mils. You can levy 3 mils by board action. For your special reserve, you can have up to the equivalent of 15 mils of money in there. So again, if a mill raises $10,000, you could have $150,000 in there. Special assessment, if roads or curb and gutter are made around your buildings or street improvements, and you want to pay that not out of your general fund, you can levy mills to do that. And again, it's board action. The last one is a judgment bond levy. That's if you're sued and you have to make payments, you do have the authority to levy to do that. That has been used by a couple districts in the past. I don't believe any are using it now, but that is available. So we have 6 funds that you can levy by board action. Let's talk about the red ones. School safety plan. This is probably a perfect timing to have this. I know a lot of school districts and a lot of school boards are getting asked about their school security with the latest school shooting down in Texas. There is money available. If you develop a school safety plan, you can bring it to the voters. And if the voter approves it, you can have up to 5 mils in money to fund your plan. And there, your plan could be whatever you come up with. It could be metal detectors, could be a security officer or a resource officer, could be anything, maybe even mental health. But you have to reauthorize it every 5 years. So if people in your community really want to do something, you know, this is an option. They have to pay for it. And by paying for it, you levy up to 5 mils to fund it. But then you could have a resource officer in your school. Again, this is part of North Dakota's approach. Local control. We're going to give you local control to develop your plan and local control to decide if you get money to implement your plan. And so the voters would have to approve that 5 mils.
And is there a 60% vote? Sorry, is there a 60% vote needed for that?
Oh, I don't believe there is. I'd have to double check. That's a great question. I'm drawing a blank. I believe it's 50%. I don't know why I'm thinking it is. Senator Shively implemented that. I think it's 50%.
Okay.
I will check and get back to you.
Awesome. Okay, we'll check on that. We'll post it on our page.
That's a great question.
Yep. One
Building
more, and
fund.
then
Yep.
sorry, one more. Can you confirm? You said the high school tuition levy could be used for career and tech tuition, and the board can approve that completely.
Yes. And like I said, there's a number of school districts who do that. It's for students when they go outside of your district to go to high school classes. And again, I shouldn't even say high school. It's called a high school tuition levy, but it's tuition for any students, K through 12. But yes, school districts do utilize that. I know it's a gray area. Some people tell you you shouldn't, but they will not tell you you can't. So it's a gray area, but I do know several school districts who use it for that.
Okay.
Good question. Good question. Building fund levy. Again, it's red. You can levy up to 20 mils or any other amount. Some school districts have a 10 mil cap, some have 15. 20 is the maximum, and that's voter approved. And I know that one's only 50% to get that in. And now I'm starting to question that. No, I'm pretty sure that's 50%. Sinking in interest is voter approved, and that's 60%. Now keep in mind, when you build a building, you're supposed to levy 110%. Amount needed to make payment plus 10%. Part of that is not everybody pays their taxes, and some people pay early, so they get a 5% discount. You need to have enough money to make sure that you can make your payment. So really what this says is you're supposed to levy 110%. So we have these three that are voter approved. Building fund levies a little bit different, where if that was approved 20 years ago and you haven't levied it, you still have the authority if it wasn't recalled. So some school districts don't levy any, and then 10 years down the road, they'll levy it again. But once you're given the authority, you have it basically indefinitely unless it was recalled. And then whatever that cap was is the cap. You just can't start and say, oh, we want to do some building improvements. We're going to have a building fund levy. No, if you don't have voter approval, you can't do it. For those districts that have been reorganized, consolidated, in your plan, the cap was 10 mils, which is a state mandate. So you had a cap of 10 mils. You can go up to 20 with another voter approved, but if you're reorganized in the last 10 or 20 years, your cap was 10, and you can't go above the 10 unless you had another election and receive permission to do that. So there's some ways to get some extra money. The biggest thing with all this is you're going to levy more mills, which means more of an impact on the taxpayer. And on top of that, taxable valuations go up every year. And I know what you hear because I've heard it and I still hear it, that you're levying the same amount of mills, but when my taxable valuation goes up, my taxes are going up. They're correct. I can't tell you they aren't. For the general fund, the 60 mils and some of these, if you levy the same mills, it's going to happen. On the sinking and interest levy, that should not happen. Again, if valuation goes up, you levy less mills because you're just levying to make the payment, the 110%. So as that goes up, as the property value goes up, mills should go down in the sinking and interest. But the rest of them, if you leave the mills the same, taxpayers are paying more. Did you have a question?
Paul, do these levies still go to a vote of the people then?
The red ones do, yes. The black underlined ones are board approved. The red ones must have a vote of the people at some point.
Okay, gotcha.
Like I said, the building fund levy, if they approved it 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you still have the authority unless it was recalled.
Right. Thank you for the clarification there.
Yep. And I will get clarification on the percentage for those on to pass the safety plan, and I'll just double check on the building fund. But again, it is an option for you. And I know that if you approach the legislature, this is the first thing they're going to say to you. Hey, we've given you an option. It's right here. You want to do it? Develop your own plan, local control, and then the locals will have to fund it. And they've given you a means to do that.
And it looks like from one of our participants, Chris John here, he can read this out here. Tax levy for school safety plan fund. The school board of a school district may levy taxes for a school safety plan fund subject to the limitations in section 5715 or 57-15-14.2 when authorized to do so by a majority of the qualified electors of a school district voting upon the question at any regular or special school district election. The ballot must specify the number of mills proposed for approval and the number of years for which that approval is to apply. Approval or reauthorization by electors of levy authority under this section may not be effective for more than 5 taxable years. So it looks like 50% plus 1 on the school safety plan levy vote.
Nope, that sounds great. Yep, that's majority. So 50% plus 1. Thanks, Chris. Chris is a good friend from Williston. Thanks for doing that. But yeah, so it's 50% plus 1 to get that approved for the school safety plan. But like I said, I know that's going to come up because I know people have already asked some legislators about what to do with school safety. And that's the first thing they mention is you have some local control available for you.
And then again from Chris, 60% on the building fund, and that is from 57-15-16.
All right, thanks, Chris. Chris is keeping me on my toes. Thank you. So 60% building fund, 60% sinking interest. So let's just review the changes coming up this year. Where are they at? Weighting factors increasing for the small school districts. On-time funding is going up, or what? Excuse me, that is the small school districts, K6 and K8s. If you have those, that's how you come up with your ADM. Per pupil payments going up $101. Transition minimum and maximums are disappearing over 7 years. On-time funding, there we are. That goes up from 60% to 70%. And again, it's slated to go up 10% every year. And then adjustments to get all school districts to 60 mills. And there's just a handful of school districts there. If you're levying less than 60 mills, they're going to make you levy a few extra mills every year to get you up. And that's a transition as well. It doesn't happen in 1 year. But again, those are the big changes. That's where all the arrows are. If you go through here, majority of the arrows. This arrow here, just want to point out, that's a 2-year plan. So if you passed a bond issue this year, that percentage is not changing. Let's go through back up here. There's the transition minimums, maximums, school size weighting factor, per student rate, on-time funding. And then ADM, everybody should have their ADM already. You should be able to get your hands on that in a matter of minutes by talking to either the business manager or the school secretary or superintendent. You should be able to get that and calculate your budget. Again, if you don't have these numbers here, I would say use what you had last year for those other programs along with these numbers right here for other local revenue. If you don't have them available, use what you had last year. That'll get you very close, very, very close. Lots of little changes going on. The biggest change, I will say, in my mind, if you're a small school district, this transition minimum is disappearing. Where's my arrows? Right here, that 80% is going to 70%. And so forth. That's going to be a challenge for a lot of small school districts, especially if you have a large amount there. And it's really happening with the property rich districts. Again, the concept would be is if you can't make it up with the weighting factor, you can make it up back here on the miscellaneous levy and the general fund levy by going to 70, by going to 12. I know that's a larger impact on the taxpayers, but I think if you look around some of the small districts who have had those transition minimum payments are levying less than other districts. And again, that's part of the equity to get everybody there. It's taxpayer equity. That's what they're trying to do, is get everybody on the formula. Any last questions? Whoops, went too far.
Right off the bat here, clarification question. So the numbers for the ADM are based on the previous year, or are they for the current year? For example, if a district was to expect more students for 2022-23, students do, or would they use that number or the number from what they ended with in 21-22?
Good question. They're going to use the numbers they ended with in 21-22 right here for the ADM. And then if they think they're going to grow, they put the number here on line 12. So let's say Jamestown's going to grow by 100 students. So last year they had 2,193 ADM, and they're going to grow by 100. We'd put 100 in here, and they're only going to get 70% of that. Remember, the 0.6 is changing to 0.7. So we'd put 100 students in here, and that's how you get your money. We don't have true on-time funding yet. You know, if you were to put next year's ADM here, you're going to want the 1.0 factor, which means there's true on-time funding, and we don't have that. So right here is where they would put that number. But again, at the end of the school year, they'll reconcile it. So let's say you put 100 in and you ended up with only 90, they're going to take some money away from you at the end. Now, if you put 100 in there from your fall enrollment and you actually continue to grow, you could get additional money down here. So this adjustment could be positive or negative. What they're really trying to do is to get to that on-time funding. And on-time funding means this: you'll get paid the greater of last year's enrollment or this year's enrollment. So that's how they define on-time funding. You're going to get the better of both worlds, or of either world. You're going to get the highest out of last year's or this year's. That's the goal. Haven't quite achieved it yet. Good question. I know it gets confusing. Basically, everything on this budget worksheet will be a year old. When you start your new budget worksheet for 22-23, it's all going to be a year old from 21-22, with the exception of right here, line 12. That'll be a projection of what you think you're going to grow. See, this is a 21-22 worksheet, and it says 22 fall enrollment above the 21 ADM. So that would be the only number that would be from the current year. Then of course they'll correct it at the end on 13. Everything else is from the previous year, including all these other numbers. This is what was collected last year. Your taxable valuation down here, this is last year's taxable valuation, not the one you're going to get in October when you do your October final budget. This will be from the previous year. So you already have that number right now. Everybody knows that number. That's your number from November or December from last year. Everything's a year old. Makes it easy to budget. It's not really good if you're growing because you're getting shorted a little bit. But for the state and for business managers, superintendents, it makes it easier to budget because there's not a whole lot to project. Because again, we started off saying it's a student-based formula. Here's where the majority of the money comes from, right here. And you already have those numbers. When school ended, Power School, you could hit the button and it would spit it out and tell you exactly what you had. So that's where I say the budgeting in school finance is pretty simple. It just gets complicated with all the exceptions and all the other rules. But if you have these numbers and leave everything else the same, you're gonna be darn close when you do your budget estimate. And again, remember, it's just June now. You have up until September or October 10th to change those things and whatever. But I think the bigger reason the School Boards Association, I used to give this presentation in January at the convention, and it was already too late because their budget was set and adopted and everything. They wanted to know what was coming, and so that's why they asked me to do this one. And so that you can see what's coming. That's why I put all the arrows in, so that you know what changes. School's growing, going to get more money. If we skip down here, transition maximum, if you're on that, you're going to get more money. Transition minimum, you're going to get less money. You need to adjust for it and be prepared for it. Other questions? Had a lot of good questions. Thanks, everyone. Nothing else?
Not seeing anything else. Let's see here. Nope. Nothing else at the moment. People may have questions later on, especially this is being recorded. So we may have others when they watch it. But for now, if questions do come up later, feel free to contact us and we can relate to Paul, or we can even put your contact information up on our website too, Dr. Stremick. Anyone else here?
Yep, my email, and I know most of the business managers have it. It's paul.stremick@outlook.com. So it's real simple. paul.stremick@outlook.com. I'm pretty good at responding within 24 hours on those questions.
Great. Great. All right.
And again,
well,
keep in mind the black underlined are board approved. Red ones are voter approved.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning, and big thank you to Dr. Stremick for presenting to us. This will be a big help in July while everyone is getting their budget set forth for the upcoming school year. Please feel free to contact him for further questions or information. We will post his contact information, like I said, with the recording and presentation. All will be available on the events page under the Lunch and Learn webinar series tab. There will be no July Lunch and Learn, so enjoy the nice weather with your friends and family and have a successful July meeting. Our Lunch and Learn is scheduled for our next Lunch and Learn is scheduled, for August 17th. The time is to be determined. You can access more information about our Lunch and Learn webinar series on our website on the events page. Have a great rest of your day and week, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.